Hello, everybody. Welcome to Into the Fire on February the 28th, 2025. This is episode number 42. What an epic guest we've got coming on tonight. Scott Michaels, an individual that I have been a fan of since he put out 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter back in 2009. Man, I have thought about bringing him on way before I even thought of had this set up to do a podcast. So this is going to be an incredible evening. You talk about an encyclopedia when it comes to Hollywood death. This guy he's just a wealth of knowledge, and I could listen to him literally for days. He may stay a little longer tonight. We'll just have to see how this goes. And if he's having fun, he'll probably stick around a little longer. And it's going to be a lot of fun. He's consulted on the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Quentin Tarantino had actually called him. I'm sure he'll talk about that. And this is just going to be an epic episode. And I'm absolutely thrilled and honored. And to tell you the truth, I'm actually a little nervous, I kind of starstruck, honestly. For me, he's somebody that I really enjoy his podcast. They're the Dearly Departed podcast. Unfortunately, I never got to take one of his tours in Los Angeles when he was running that, and I think COVID kind of put a stop to that. But what an awesome guest. And let's just bring him on and start talking, and he can tell us a little bit more about himself. I don't want to waste any time. Scott, welcome to the show.
Hi,
Great
Jason.
to have you here.
Well, thanks for asking. What a nice introduction, I guess. Yeah. So thanks. It's very, very kind of you. And it's great to be here. Thanks for asking me.
So, and it was my pleasure to have you on. And tell us a little bit about how you ended up getting started and interested in the world of death, so to speak.
Well, I sort of gravitated towards the things that are forbidden. And I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in Detroit, actually, and things that most people recoil, when they hear about when the cemeteries weren't a thing. Obviously, that was 60 plus years ago. People didn't go to cemeteries for enjoyment. You solely went to mourn somebody. So they were kind of, you whispered when you drove past a cemetery. And then when we had these crazy rumors about haunted houses and murders in the neighborhood, and I used to drive my little Stingray over there. So these sorts of things interested me. And where I lived it was a really, they called it the 10th highest accident prone traffic corner in the city of Detroit. So people were killed in front of my house a couple of times a year. So I saw that. It was part of my youth. And I saw dead bodies back then. And I've known a few people that have been murdered over the years. I know this is your area. This is, but to a kid, I didn't know any different. And I'm not saying, ooh, I'm from Detroit, I'm a tough guy. It's just the way it was. You know what I mean? So I knew a lot of this stuff, and I grew up with a lot of this stuff, desensitized. And long story short, I came to Hollywood with some friends on a dare. We went to Forest Lawn, and I got within 6 feet of some of my favorite stars. And then I went to where, some of them died. And then I was like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I like. And amazingly enough, I got to make a career out of it. So celebrities, and how they die. It's a bit of a niche, but here I am.
Yeah. And how did that start out with I know you started out on another tour company, isn't that right? And then
That's right. Yeah. The original Dark Side of Hollywood tour was called Graveline Tours. We used old renovated Cadillac hearses that we air conditioned and put 7 seats in, and the old suicide doors, and people climbed in, and we showed them, 70 different locations where deaths and scandals happened. And that was back in the day when people knew who, people like, oh my gosh, I can't think of some of the people there, Alan Ladd and people like that were on that tour, but that was in the 80s. So people, that wasn't that long ago then. Now we've had to modify it. After Graveline shut down, a very long story short, I started Dearly Departed Tours in 2004. So that was my own company. I borrowed from Graveline. I still have a lot of respect for that, my old boss, Greg Smith, and his original concept, but that was gone. So I started my own. And I've always collected odd sorts of artifacts, Hollywood types of artifacts. When the earthquake in 1994, a lot of houses lost their walls and chimneys. So I was snatching up bricks from people's houses. And, so I had this huge collection of bricks. And then I started collecting doors from houses and hotels where terrible things happened. happen. And I ended up opening up the dearly departed museum. And the biggest thing we collected, obviously, well, you probably know this, maybe your listeners don't, but we own the Jane Mansfield's the car that Jane Mansfield was killed in 1967. So it's, you know, an 18 by 8-foot piece of twisted, rusted junk, and but history happened there, so we own that. And that was all on display in the museum, and so we shut down, and now everything's in storage, and hopefully we'll be reopening again soon. Hopefully,
Yeah, Scott, did you see that you saw Jane Mansfield on that photo that just popped up? Did
I
you?
did, yeah.
So was that actually taken inside of the car? That
No,
car?
no,
Okay, no.
no.
Okay.
Jane was only in this car for about 2 hours.
All right.
It belonged to the owner of the restaurant that she was performing in. So I'm not sure which car there are several of her cars that exist. I'm not sure about all the others, but this is the only one that we own is where history happened.
Yeah. So you have and you've been offered, I mean, you get basically stuff sent to you all the time. And that's pretty cool I mean, you get some really interesting items sent to you. And what are some of the other interesting items that you've had sent?
Well, I mean, some of the things that I own, I mean, I collect so much stuff. And when I go to Hollywood, people do hire me to do private tours, and I have a little suitcase ready to go where I bring about, I don't know, 15 or so items with me. And in it is like a piece of Patsy Cline's airplane, a piece of John Denver's airplane, a tile from the pool that Brian Jones drowned in, Mae West's dentures, Sharon Tate's false eyelashes, just a piece of the Hindenburg. I have so many odd bits of here and there's. And I used to keep it all in a little cabinet in my house. And then, when I opened up the museum, I was like, well, this actually takes up a whole storefront, a whole store. So, and people, when they have these things around their house, they'll donate them because they know they'll come to a good home. So like more recently, I got a piece of coal from Loretta Lynn's house, from Butcher Holler, just odd, weird little things. Carrie Fisher, I used to know her a million years ago. I grabbed one of her cigarette butts when she was, just a stupid thing, a Carrie Fisher cigarette butt. But I had this all set up with a little pin light and a little, it's silly. I don't take it that seriously, but I take what I do seriously. So it's hard to explain. I do have a sense of humor about it.
I'll tell you something. I knew that you would appreciate this, and I wanted to show you this. And this is an empty J&B bottle with a couple of this, and this came from in front of Zsa Zsa Gabor's house. And so I knew you would love it. I knew you would absolutely love that.
That's great. I wonder if she got angry and chucked it over the fence.
Well, it was actually sitting up there kind of close. It was like right up there by the street, and I knew it was her house anyway. And she had the Hungarian flag flying. And anyway, it was around the time when the O.J. Simpson case had happened, and because it was a week after that case had happened, and this is pre-cop days, and I happened to be driving in Los Angeles, and we went over to where O.J.'s house was, and I wanted to see the locations and stuff. And I remember I turned around in Michelle Pfeiffer's driveway. I think she lived on Rockingham as well, down the street. I could be wrong, Scott. I'm sure you'd know where the heck she lived, but turned around in her driveway, at least according to the map of the Stars homes. And then I got stopped by LAPD and reprimanded for going down Rockingham. But nevertheless, I knew you'd appreciate that because
that's great. That was an interesting time to be in LA. That's for sure. With that, they had that area of Rockingham and a Bundy Drive. They had it cordoned off. Bundy's a high traffic area, as you know, you were there. So it's an important artery during rush hour. But at OJ's house, they had that neighborhood blocked off for like 5 blocks in each direction. You couldn't get anywhere near it. And with Bundy, if you even tapped your brakes in front of, where Nicole's house was, condo, the police would get you for obstruction. So it was a very weird time. But funny enough, one of the times I was there on foot, I went over because everyone wanted to see it. I mean, that's what sort of gave us permission. Was O.J. Simpson. That's when everybody started to go and seeing places, in person, and it was acceptable. And I was there with my sister, and Jerry Springer was there. It was like the Sunday morning, and no one else was there but Jerry Springer and a friend of his. And I was like, "Oh, hey, Jerry, can we have some pictures?" It was just so surreal. That time in LA was such a bizarre time.
Well, you created findadeath.com, and you own it. That's your site still to this day. Is that right?
That's
and
right.
So how did that end up starting up? And how did that started in what, 98? Is that
Yeah,
right?
1998. Yeah, it was when people started getting computers. I mean, the internet had been around for a long time, but we didn't have the access to it. Like, everyone was started getting home computers at that point. And so when I was with Graveline, I left Graveline and I moved to England because I was in a relationship. So while I was there, because we were trying to get my visa status acceptable so I could stay permanently and work in the country. But for 18 months, I was forbidden to leave or work while that was going through. So during that time, I had a computer and I just started doing virtual sightseeing instead. And no one was doing it at that point. And so I wanted to see where Princess Diana was killed in Paris. And I was so close when I was in London. I was like an hour away if you took the train. And I couldn't get to it, and it bothered me a lot because it was such an important thing. So as soon as I got my status, I went to Paris. I took the pictures and I uploaded them, and I started this website, just sort of virtual sightseeing. I guess yeah, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
So I was the first one doing that at that point. I'm sounding like I'm not bragging about it. It just was. It's just the way it happened. And it took off. People really responded to it. They liked my sense of humor too, because I got to be quite. I wouldn't do it nowadays, but I used to be pretty nasty when talking about
Really?
it. But warts and all. I mean, just because you're famous, and just
Yeah.
because you're dead doesn't mean you were a good person when you were alive. And I
No,
called people out on that kind of thing. If you were
that's
a
true.
jerk, it doesn't go away when you die. And
Yeah.
and my site was all about death. So yeah, I was
Yeah.
honest.
My dad was a highway patrolman in Los Angeles, and actually, there's a couple of stars that he stopped, and he was like, "Yeah," like Telly Savalas, and he said, "Man, he was a freaking jerk."
Yeah,
That's me sitting in my dad's patrol car right there.
that's so cool. What a
Yeah, so
great picture. What a
I was in
great.
the driver's seat there, and so this brings me to the next thing. And I've told you this before. I'd messaged you, and one of the things that I find, you were fascinated with the Manson murders as well, and it's become kind of the case that you're really known for, as far as just being somewhat of a historian, I would say. Is that going out on a limb, or would
No. I
you?
mean, a historian used to mean something different than it does these days. But no, I mean, if you have something to show for your work, I think that
Yeah.
qualifies that title. So yeah, I will accept that. And I do a lot of research, and although research is based on research that other people did, I still collect it and I still present it in a different way.
So this is the original book from the mid 70s, and this came out in 1974. Helter Skelter, best crime book in the history of crime books. Still, I in my opinion, I've listened to you, Scott, on a lot of the different things. I know that there's a lot of different opinions as to this book, etc. But this book, my parents got it. They started reading it, and when they did, we lived like 5 miles away from Sharon Tate's house, and I remember my dad telling my mom, "Don't be going up to that house." And I remember my mom loading me up in the car with we lived in an apartment. It's four apartments, and it was like on Van Nuys Boulevard, right just like a block away from Valley Vista. And then anyway, I remember my mom loading me up in the car with the other highway patrolman's wife, and Cielo Drive was not easy to find pre-Google. I mean, it's
Yeah,
kind of up there, hidden up in there. And so, but I do remember, and there were still kind of hippies running around Los Angeles then. And even then, there was people checking you out, like, who is this person driving up here? And watching you, but I do remember going up there and getting out and looking at through the gates, and all you could really see was the corner of the garage. But
yeah.
and then from there, the Hillside Stranglers, of course, were running around Los Angeles. And I can remember, I know this is not normal, but it's kind of like what you're talking about, where you have that almost obsession with it. And so as a kid at like 6 years old, I was like, I want to be a homicide detective. That's just what I wanted to do. And it wasn't because of any of the work that they did on that case. And of course, with respect to this specific case, I've got all kinds of books on it. You've got a
Sure,
ton
sure, yeah.
more. But so in reference to that, you start really, you get out there, you're starting to do the tour. That's one of those things that you're doing, this tour and so forth. And you've talked to a lot of the people that are involved in this case. I mean, from Stephen Weiss to, you knew Virginia Graham and became friends with her, and remind us as to who Virginia Graham is.
Virginia Graham was in prison with Susan Atkins when Susan Atkins, who was the person who was responsible, it's hard. You get technical about it. I don't. She was one of the people that were at the Tate residence when the murders occurred. She participated in the murders. And Susan Atkins, cute little 19-year-old kid. Virginia was in prison for floating a bad check at that point, and Susan was arrested for something else. And while they were in the dormitory, Susan was bragging about, oh, those murders in Benedict Canyon, that was us. And Virginia thought she thought she was full of it, but ultimately got the truth out of her. And Virginia is the one who broke the case. She's the one that said, I think you'll find that the person who did this is in prison with me now. And so she was responsible for really uncovering, for breaking the case. They would eventually got to it, but there was it's like a ridiculous amount of errors that were made during the investigation. And here's Virginia Graham, who was a former madam floating checks in prison, breaks the case for everyone.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but it had really nothing to do with good police work. They kind of did a lot of, they didn't really work well together with other agencies, and they kind of dropped the ball in a lot of different respects.
I mean, it's beyond, it was arrogance, but it was also just buffoonery, the two departments wouldn't work together. But I mean, the fact that Susan Atkins, she was supposed to, she was going to be the star witness for the prosecution, and she wasn't confessing. She was bragging about all these wonderful, I tasted Sharon Tate's blood and all these things that she was so excited to do. And we live with this groovy guy named Jesus Christ or Manson. And then she was bragging, and she was going to go on the stand and brag about all this stuff. And finally Manson got to her, and she clammed up. So they got someone else, Linda Kasabian. In the meantime, Susan Atkins' confession was sold illegally and published in a Sunday paper for hundreds of thousands of people to read. And Susan Atkins straight out said, oh yeah, and then we drove for a while and we threw the clothes off the cliff, and then we drove a little while longer and through the, and the police never looked for him, and they had this information. And it took a news crew just for giggles the next day to go out and find. I mean, it was outrageous. It was so embarrassing for Los Angeles Police Department. So embarrassing.
Well, I'll tell you something, Scott. When that movie came out, which was a made-for-television movie, it was a 2-part, and I was a little kid. But remember that you already know there was 3 channels on TV that you watched: ABC, NBC, and CBS. So everybody was glued to the television set watching that, especially us, or anybody that lived in the LA area, especially. And we lived like really close, so it was. And by the way, I think that movie is excellent. I really do.
Yeah.
All these years later, I think it's probably the best one of all of them. And of course, the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a little different, but I thought it was a really good job by the guy that played Manson, etc.
Steve Railsback, Steve Railsback was really, really good. Yeah. And that was a hell of a movie. I wasn't, I was a little kid growing up in Detroit. I was, halfway across the country. And I remember that movie coming out. And then I remember around that time that the death penalty was overturned. And all those people that were convicted of murder that were going to be killed through capital punishment the death penalty was overturned. Now they were eligible for parole. And I remember being Manson at the end of that movie remember when the watch stopped and he's looking right at Bugliosi, and it's like, I thought Manson was going to come crawling up the side of my house and into my windows, because that happened. That did happen in Los Angeles. They literally crawled in people's windows while they were in bed and murdered people. So it was a scary time. And yes, we were spoon-fed the news, not spoon-fed like now, but back then we were given just snippets of news a couple of times a day, and that left a lot of time for people's imaginations to run rampant. And as you know, I mean, paranoia was high. It was a hot summer. Everyone had to lock their doors and windows. Nobody had air conditioning, and and you're scared someone's going to come crawling up in your windows. I mean, that is terrifying to a child. So yeah, it did a number. I think that's probably the main thing, is it just scared the hell out of everybody.
Yeah, I'll tell you what it did. As I was growing up, I remember my mom, I'd sneak peeks in that book and stuff, and I'd see that, the cardboard cutouts of the people in the book. And then I grew up and I'd read it, and then I did a book report on it. And I'm sure my teachers were like, hey, wait, what's this kid writing a book report on this? But my parents, they knew I was reading it. And then, so from there, I can remember when I ended up making it to college, and I went into a store called Kinko's. And well, actually, I went in there to blow up some pictures. I wanted to blow them up for a presentation I was going to do. And they were like, oh, no, you can't do that. You got to have a copyright release. And so I said, well, what's that? And they said, well, you have to call the author or the publisher. So I called the publisher, and they were like, heck no. And so I knew that he had a law office in Los Angeles, and I left a message, and I couldn't believe it. But he ended up calling me, and I talked to Vincent Bugliosi
Wow.
for, well, yeah, you've talked to him, his voice is very, very unusual. So the moment you hear his voice, it's very distinct.
Yeah.
And the moment he was on the phone, I remember going, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're calling me." And he goes, "Oh, hey, I'm nobody special." And so I said, "Well, I can assure you this isn't for me to make any money on this. I just wanted to blow up these pictures." He goes, "I don't care if you make money. Good for you." And the problem is that I wanted to talk about the Manson murders, and he wanted to talk more so about Outraged, which was the book that he wrote about the O.J. Simpson case. And
Right.
but very, very nice man, and for him to spend the time with me, 20 minutes, and I've still never forgotten it. My biggest regret, I'll tell you, is I wish that I could have called him and told him, "Hey, by the way, I made it to become a homicide detective, and in large part, it's because of you writing that book." And I didn't get the chance because he had died. What, I think it's like 5 or 6 years ago, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
close to that. Yeah,
Although, it's
but
funny about the case, though, because my friend Craig Harvey, who is the chief of special investigations for the LA County coroner, he retired just a few years ago, but he was like the coroner. He was the guy for Los Angeles, and again, Tate LaBianca. That's what got him into forensic science, and I just think it's really fascinating how that has affected people. It really
yeah,
has.
yeah.
It's fascinating. So it's a really respectable place to go, because it's also really easy to think, if you were a hippie back then, how easily it would have been to jump in with that crew. You know what I mean? Because it all started very nice and lovely
Oh
and peace, and
man,
so
I've asked myself. I mean, hey, if I'd have been around and that was going on, and that was kind of the mentality of everybody, would I have been hanging out over there? I mean,
yeah,
just chilling out and whatever. And I'm sure that, you look at a lot of these kids that were involved in this, Tex Watson, doesn't he may still even hold the state record of some track event or something like that. But a lot of those, like Leslie Van Houten, she was a decent student, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And also, people that were hooked up with them, that Angela Lansbury's daughter, Jean Martin's daughter, they were all they all hung
Yeah.
out with the Manson family for a short period of time. So it was really easy because there were a lot of communes. There were a lot, and it was a desirable for that period of time existence, just kind of staying away from the man and have babies and grow vegetables and walk around naked and do drugs and make love. And it's pretty appealing if that's all you have to do. It just turned as far as these particular group was, but it's a fascinating existence. It was the 60s.
So let's talk about 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter, which, by the way, in my opinion, I think it's the best documentary out there in reference to this case. And I'm not just saying that because you're on here. I absolutely think it's awesome. And the amount of work that you put into that, and just going to the different scenes, I think what is 30 locations, and just the history of it, and the way you guys put it together all the way from beginning to end. Ladies and gentlemen, if you go to my, you can catch it on YouTube for free. I know you can also buy it on Amazon, and you preferred go buy it, but you can watch it on YouTube, and it's excellent. Tell me how that got started. That's a huge thing to tackle, is it not?
Well, it's funny because Mike Dorsey, who is a filmmaker, who is now he's quite, he's very successful filmmaker, but back then he just got out of film school, and his mother and he took my tour back when it was still on Gold Star events, and it was like $10 tickets or something like that. And the mom says to Mike, maybe you should think of hooking up with this guy, maybe doing something with him. You need a project, and he sounds pretty knowledgeable about stuff. So Mike and I started talking, and another guy by the name of Lloyd Adams, the three of us got together, and we started doing this tour. And it took like a year for us to do this documentary. We were doing it in our spare time, weekend here, a day here, kind of stuff. So it was all very, by the seat of our pants kind of a production. And thank God we did. And not, yeah, it's been great for my, career, quote unquote, but it has legs, it's a document now. Some of those locations are gone permanently, and we were able to document them. So instead of going, how could they have done this? Why did they do this? What was it like? And now this is where they did it, and this is what they did, so it was a geographic tour of the Tate LaBianca murder. So So yeah, I'm proud of it. I really am. I kind of like to go back in and tweak it if we could, but because there are some things that I would like to, that my opinions have changed over the year since that's come out. But I'm very proud of it. I think I think it's an excellent historic document.
Yeah, I do. There's part of me, I wish that the Tate House had never been tore down, and I fear that the La Bianca House at some point will be. Ladies, hey, Amanda, throw up that ad for that on the La Bianca House. So that thing sold for 1.7 million not too long ago. Well, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, which is probably a screaming deal or I guess 1.8 million. That's a screaming deal. I got a proposition for you, Scott. I'm telling you right now. I've been watching this house. I'm watching it to one day, and I know that the owners that currently live there, they're not necessarily friendly to the idea of people wanting to stare at that house and take pictures, etc. I would love to rent that house for like one night, or at least just go there. And I want to take you with me, because here's what I want to do. I show the pictures of the writings on the walls, Amanda, the death to pigs, etc. Yeah, there you go. What I want to do, Scott, is I want to go there. And if that thing ever turns into an Airbnb, I'm renting it for one night. And the reason why, I want to luminol it.
Oh
And
yeah,
and
yeah.
I mean, how cool would that be as an experiment, just to see if that would luminesce over 50 years later?
I
And
wonder. Yeah, I wonder how many coats of paint are on that thing. But
I don't know.
yeah, and I
I think
wonder, does it come through like several coats of paint? I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
it could. I know that they've luminoled like attics where like massive things have happened, and we're talking decades and decades and decades. I think it would be a fascinating experiment.
Oh my
Experiment.
gosh.
Not
Yeah.
not only that. Do you know that? Have you met them, the current owners,
No. No.
or rather, have you been in that house? Have you been
No,
inside the
never.
house?
Zach Bagans owned it last, and he promised he'd get me in there, and he didn't. So I have a chip on my shoulder. But it was so close, so close. But no,
Yeah.
I've never been in it. I've always wanted to. Of course, I've always wanted to. I mean, if there's one place I could preserve, I guess, in Los Angeles would be that one. And someone always, I would want to live in it. I don't want to live in a murder scene, no way. But I would probably, I'd love to have it and save it. It's
Yeah.
just, but
I'm with you
living
on
in
that.
something like that doesn't interest me at all. But I don't know what you
Which
do.
made which made me just think about something I'd seen in the news recently, where the new owners of the Marilyn Monroe house were wanting to tear it down, and I was like, "What? That's just crazy. Why would you even buy that property to tear it down?" It just makes me sick. But so as far as the case itself goes, and when you were doing that 6 degrees of helter skelter, I mean, that had to be something to go out to the Barker Ranch, and I know that you'd said in there that you would never go back out there again. Why was that? I mean, is it just because it's so treacherous getting out there?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're psyched up by this whole thing while you're going out there, and it is in Death Valley. Uh, the first time I went out there was with a friend, and we were just in my little Jeep Wrangler, and thankfully we were. So it took us. It's only 180 miles, I think, from Los Angeles, but it's 6 hours to get there, and 20 miles of that is serious off road. You're an hour from any phone signal when you get out there, and when you get out there, the ranch was still there. There was no electricity or water, but there was a refrigerator there, and people would, to keep food away from like the rats and stuff like that, and the animals, they would, and there was like food in the refrigerator, and the beds were made, and this is in the middle of the desert, so people were there, although we didn't see them. And a lot of people in the desert, you look around and everything's got bullet holes in it, because why not? It's the desert. And so it is just hard, you just don't know what's out there, and if something happens to you, you're 20 miles off road from anything or anyone. So yeah, it's really disconcerting, especially when you think about what happened out there and who those people were and the conversations that were had out there. So yeah, the first time I went there was in my Jeep. I didn't want to go back, but when the filmmakers wanted to do that with me, I said they wanted to go back out there. I'm like, I really don't want to. And they said, we go. And I said, well, okay, I'll go with you if you're armed. And they went, okay. So that's why we went back, or that's how I went back for the second time. And I'm glad we did, because it's gone now. So we were able to document it. Manson's last breath as a free man was in that house and in that little cabin out in the desert. And yeah, so it was something being out there. It's and people still go out there, and it's a pilgrimage, and there are a lot of pro Manson people out there, people I don't want to be around.
Right.
And so yeah, you don't know. I've met a lot of
Yeah.
really odd people doing this. I
Yeah,
met a
I'm
lot.
sure. I'm sure you have. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure, no doubt. So I'm actually surprised that somebody hasn't loaded up that truck that used to belong to Tex Watson. You know what I mean?
yeah,
What keeps people from stealing some of that stuff that's out there? Is
nothing.
it just? Yeah, that's what I thought. But it was just kind of weird that that thing has still been out there all these years later. And yeah, I don't know. I'd still like to see it. There's just something about it. I always kind of wanted to go out there. I know my wife would be like, heck no, but it would just be interesting to just see it. And
Yeah.
so, but yeah, the other thing did you ever communicate with anybody from the Manson family or did you ever try to correspond with any of the girls like Patricia Krenwinkel or Leslie Van Houten, Susan
No,
Atkins?
when I was younger, I wrote some people letters in hopes that I got an autograph, really. And one of the first book after I read Helter Skelter was "Will You Die for Me?" It's Tex Watson's book, and it was the first time I'd really heard a first person's account of what happened on Cielo Drive on that night. So I wrote Tex a letter, and it was a sincere letter, but it's such an interesting book, it really is. And not secretly, but I'd hope for a response from him, because people weren't writing serial killers back then. It wasn't a thing back then. But I was
Right.
I was sending a lot of I sent Grandma Walton a fan letter. You know what I mean? I sent Lauren Bacall a fan letter. So this was something I didn't write as a fan. I wrote and I read. I said I read your book, and I hope and sincerely that you turned the page and you rehabilitated and you're taking responsibility. So I was honest about it, and I got a response from him. But as far as the others, no, I never took it any further than Tex, and probably because they didn't write anything. Leslie or Pat didn't write anything. And Manson, people often ask me if I, you know, ever wrote Manson. Like, I have no desire to talk to Manson. I never did. There's
Yeah.
nothing I could possibly learn from him. The girls, I'd love to talk to them, but they'll never want to talk to me about what I want to talk about. So it's sort of pointless. But yeah, so Tex is who I reached out to, but no, otherwise, no.
What are your thoughts about Leslie getting out?
Well, if her name wasn't Leslie Van Houten and everyone knew her because of Charles Manson, she would have been out a long time ago.
Yeah, you're
She
absolutely right.
yeah, she's I do believe that she's remorseful. I do believe she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and she didn't technically cause anyone's death. So she didn't know that. She's not a scientist. She couldn't know. Even she would say, I felt like Mrs. LaBianca was dead as she was plunging the knife into somebody 16 times.
Right.
I don't
Right.
get it. I don't get
Yeah.
that. So, but
I
good for her. Good for her.
well, I actually kind of agree with you. I mean, she was a model inmate for longest female inmate in the history of prison there. And well, now it's Patricia Krenwinkel,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm not surprised that she got out. I actually, tell you the truth, it probably should have happened a long time ago. But I mean, I think she did what she needed to do. She has at least one master's degree, if not two, and I wish her the best of luck, I guess, and hopefully I don't think she's a threat to society at this point. But
No, I think nowadays when they use that term, it's not they themselves that are the threat. It's their psycho fans.
yeah,
It's like the Menendez boys. If they want to release them, they may not be a threat to society, but their kooky fans are. So,
oh
and
yeah,
who knows, reality television, or they have influence. So,
yeah,
there's the people automatically assume, a Leslie, a 78-year-old lady, is going to run around with a knife. Well, that's not going to happen. But her
no,
psycho 20-year-old fans are. I wouldn't be surprised.
no. Actually, the only other one that I could see actually getting out is Bobby Boussolet. Boussolet.
Yeah.
It probably will never happen. But I think that the reason why he's probably still in is just because of the notoriety of this case, for sure.
But he
But
did kill somebody out of them all. He
no, he
actually
did,
killed
he
one.
did, he
So
did. But there's a
yeah,
lot of yeah, you're absolutely right. And simply because of the notoriety, of
yeah.
course.
No,
And
you're
in
right
his
about
case,
that. You're absolutely right.
and
People have done
and in,
worse and got out.
oh yeah, absolutely. Uh, and that's coming from a homicide guy.
Mhm.
There's some people that should never get out. I don't see Patricia Krenwinkel ever getting out. Actually, she participated a little bit too much and
Oh
she did a
yeah,
lot of damage, carnage,
yeah.
and I don't see that happening at all. So the other thing that you put together that I've put it on my playlist on my YouTube channel, and you know he gets the hits, but it's that video about the Wonderland murders, and I thought that was absolutely fascinating. That you go back there and the Wonderland murder crime scene video is actually on YouTube. You can watch the full video, and I recognized a familiar voice, Tom Lang from the O.J. Simpson case, in there
Sure.
narrating it. And but you put that video together. How did you even get into that look? I'm sure you knew somebody that let you into the location. But what was fascinating is you going from the actual crime scene to when you were there. That residence hasn't changed a bit, really, even the
Yeah.
same flooring. So
Yeah.
what was that like going inside of there?
It was Wonderland, the Wonderland murders, and I mean, they were drug dealers. They were horrible people, all of them. Nobody deserves to be bludgeoned with a lead pipe, but sometimes you kind of go, well, you play with fire, you get burned, and that's what they did. So these guys were bludgeoned to death in this house on Wonderland Avenue, and the house is weirdly, it was a rental. It was rented for many years, and they had a lot of tenants over the years. And when it was available to rent a few years ago, I don't know how long ago it was now, a friend of mine who works in real estate saying the house is empty. I'll tell you where the key is. Here's the code, and check it out. So I called Mike Dorsey again, who we did 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter with, and he grabbed a camera. We went up there, and we didn't have a portable DVD player, but a lot of screen captures because you were just saying how you can see the Wonderland crime scene. It was the first mass murder that was documented by the LAPD with a video camera, a walkthrough. And what I found shocking is that was given as an extra feature in the movie Wonderland that with Val Kilmer. If you rented that movie, it was all about the crimes. For an extra feature, here are the victims with their heads bashed in for your entertainment. I found that shocking, but I bought it for that reason too, because I want to see, of course. So we went and then we matched it up. We matched up where all the victims were found, and we went through the house. And yeah, it was shockingly the same. The steps where the tube socks were found, and everything was still there, but it was empty. So we had free reign of the place. It was fascinating to be in there, and disconcerting because it was a horrible, violent crime. And I don't know if you believe in the paranormal or anything like that. I happen to believe in all that stuff, but I'm also the first person to go, no, you're full of it when it comes to things like that. But one of the things I do when I visit places where famous people died is I'll go to that place and I'll find the spot where that person died, and I'll sit there because I want to see the last thing that they ever saw. My friend who lives in Mae West's apartment where she died, I laid in bed and I looked at the ceiling. I thought this is the last thing Mae West did, saw. So I went there and I sat where all the victims were and just kind of took it in. And then that was when that was the only time, or only 2 times where I got really ultra, like, I got to get out of here now. This is bad news. So there are bad vibes. Of course, these locations, I think, echo off of the horrible things that happened in them. And it certainly struck me at that time. I'm not easy to shake when it comes to things like that, but it was something I felt like I needed to get out now.
Yeah, so that's not a place that you're spending the night at.
No, no.
Was there any other kind of places like that you were just like, heck no, I'm not there? There's a spooky vibe to it.
Yeah, well, yes, the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, which is notorious for so many murders and suicides that happen in it. And Richard Ramirez was a resident of it, and most famously, Elisa Lam was her name, who was the exchange student from Canada who went missing. And that's with the crazy elevator footage with that poor woman who was having obviously a psychotic breakdown in the elevator, and she went missing. And then everyone in the hotel kind of went, the water smells funny about a week later, and the water tastes funny a little late. And they opened up the water tank on the roof, and she was in it. So she'd been, she drowned in that water tank. So it's this notorious, horrible place in downtown LA where extraordinary amount of terrible things. And I was in that hotel when I did an episode of Ghost Adventures, and that was one where I got panicked and I had to leave one of the particular rooms. I didn't like the place anyway, but one particular room really stood out, and that's with like the hairs on my hair, on my back, and on my everything. It was bad news. That's Yeah.
Now, the house that the murder happened, that Bobby Bussoleo killed. Remind me of the name
Gary
of the
Hinman?
music. Gary Hinman. That's right. I can't believe I had a blackout on that. Did that house survive the fires in LA? Because it's
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
oh, it did. Okay.
Yeah.
Was there any other massive, major locations that had ended up getting destroyed that, of all your major cases that you've even shown people?
No, the
Are they
closest it came to was the Thelma Todd garage, where Thelma Todd, the actress, mysteriously died of carbon monoxide poisoning, most likely murdered by her boyfriend, the gangster, and so it came close to that, but no, it didn't. They hit a lot of significant locations, architecturally and otherwise, and it destroyed a lot of memorabilia and art and costumes and props and amazing artifacts. But as far as the true crime stuff, the stuff I went to, no, it didn't. It didn't really touch on anything like that. And then I'm grateful, sad to go. This is okay. That's not. I don't mean it like that. But it doesn't affect my life in that regard. But that sounds really callous. But I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. You have a Cielo Drive sign behind you, and that's a legitimate Cielo Drive sign. Is that correct? How'd you end up getting that?
Well, I mean, it's not the original from 1969.
Right.
All the signs in Los Angeles were replaced throughout the years. There's still a couple of original, like Benedict Canyon signs that are up there. But and then this is the weirdest thing. Honestly, I was driving up Cielo Drive, and I'm not even joking. Somebody the night before, a car hit the street sign, and the sign, unattached to anything, was laying on the side of the road. And I'm like, it was truly that simple. That I happened to be driving up Cielo Drive, and there was the sign on the road. It's like, okay, there's a sign for it. There's a sign. So,
Yeah, there's the sign for sure. So Quentin Tarantino reaches out to you, and that had to be something. And because he's obviously impressed with all of the work and stuff that you've done. And so tell us a little bit about how that experience was.
well, yeah, it was wonderful. I mean, I got to the office one day and I was given the message that Quentin Tarantino wants to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. Because there was buzz that he was going to be doing a movie about the Manson murders for about a year and a half before the movie came out. There was all this talk. And I thought, there's no way. There's just no way. He's not going to touch on something like that or do a movie about that. But I returned the call and they said, Quentin saw your documentary and wants to meet you. So his office was over on Sunset, and I went there, and I figured I was going to meet a panel of people, and he might be in the room, and I did meet that panel of people. But then they said, you want to go meet QT, and I'm like, sure. So they introduced me, went into his office, and they shut the door and left us alone. And my documentary was on his desk. And he said, I love this. This is exactly, I love this. And I was like, that was a huge compliment. So, and we got on well because he's a nerd and he loves nerdy things like I do with this. It's this case is so weird, and he loves all the weird details, and that's why he came to me. So and then I took him and his team out location scouting when they were still looking for a place to use for Rick Dalton's house. We walked up Cielo Drive to see if that was going to be possible, and then my friends who own the house that Jay Sebring lived in when he was murdered, and Quentin ended up using that house, but it didn't make it into the final cut. It'll be in some sort of director's cut that'll be released at some point. And then, and then they put Jay Sebring's salon back where Jay Sebring's salon was, which is amazing because that was on my tour. And all of a sudden we were transported back to 1969. So he's a total nerd, and we hit it off. And at the end of the meeting, he says, what I really want to do is bring 1969 back to Los Angeles. And I had my jacket on. I said, I got to show you this. And I pulled up my arm, and this is my 1969 tattoo. And he goes, you are the guy. And I'm like, that is so cool. So it was just that nerdy and just that fun because we were like throwing weird stuff out at each other, just weird facts, and it was great.
Well, I mean, one of the weird facts actually, and I remember watching you talk about this, where the sheet music was from Paul Revere and the Raiders on the piano in the living room of the Tate House. Isn't that right? Oh, no, it wasn't. No, I'm sorry. It's the Mamas and the Papas Straight Shooter.
Right.
Isn't that
Yeah.
the sheet music? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, the resident that used to live in that house was somebody from Paul Revere and the Raiders. And
right.
the furniture was the same furniture because the furniture just came with the house when they rented it.
Yeah.
And so but it's the obscure facts about the sheet music from the Mamas and the Papas that you know that, and you were learned that. How did you even learn that?
That that came, as I said, research is based on other people's research, and that was had to have been written down in the documents somewhere. Maybe in the crime scene photographs, but that I got that fact from Ed Sanders' book, The Family, and
Yeah.
was on the piano was Straight Shooter, and underneath that was Pomp and Circumstance. Now, when talking about the piano that was in the room where the murders occurred, they rented the house fully furnished. Sharon and Roman did, and before that was Terry Melcher and Mark Lindsay from Paul Revere and the Raiders. And I met Mark Lindsay, and this is several years before Quentin Tarantino, and Mark Lindsay said, "Oh yeah, Terry and I, we wrote Good Times, or I forget the name of that song, but we wrote 2 songs, and on that piano." And I'm like, "You're kidding? That piano that was in the room when the murders occurred, that those horrible things happened, witnessed." And I told Tarantino, he was like, he lit up, and those songs ended up in the movie, as did the sheet music. And so it was neat because I was able to participate, but I can't take full credit for that because I got that information from someone else. So a lot of the information is from me, like Mark Lindsay. I got that from Mark directly. That wasn't published anywhere. So there were things, that I was able to provide specifically, but also I collect.
Yeah, you collect a lot. And that's what I find fascinating. Just those little pieces that you kind of bring, even though it was mentioned in that book. By the way, that book is actually really interesting to read. And what are your thoughts? Do you think that Charles Manson, wasn't there another book that he actually basically somebody wrote it like for him, and he talks about going up to the house and planning that he saw the scene and it was like too much. And then he ended up planning some evidence. What are your thoughts on that? You think that's even possible?
I think it's Manson in His Own Words is what it was called.
That's right. That's right. I've read it. Yeah.
Which wasn't because it was written by somebody else. It's like the Bible, it's like the Bible according to who, Matthew or Mark or Luke, So it's sort of like in that regard, kind of an ironic comparison. But as far as Manson going back up to the crime scene after the murders and rearranging things, I don't subscribe to that at all because Manson wasn't a brave person. Manson, was not one to put his neck out. He always made other people do stuff, and for the danger aspect of it. That night, it was a quiet night, 12:30 in the morning. People heard the screams. People called the police. Dogs were barking. People heard the gunshots. So it's not like it happened in the middle of the night. No one heard it. A lot of people heard it. There were calls to the police. Someone went out in their car and were trying to help whoever these people were that were screaming. So I don't think Manson had the nerve to go out there to that crime scene because he didn't know what he was going to find. So I don't subscribe to that one bit. Now, some people will try to explain away, well, then how did Sharon Tate's blood get on the outside on the front porch? And I said, well, the LAPD screwed up a lot on this case. The officer who smudged, the fingerprint that Tex Watson left behind on the speaker on the intercom thing, and so I think they just misidentified some of the blood. But if what were to happen really happened, that means that Sharon Tate died on the floor by the sofa. They picked Sharon Tate up without dragging her, took her outside, dead weight, literally dead weight. But that's, what that's like. I mean, that's a heavy piece of it's you can't move a dead body easily. And then you would have to pick her up and put her back where she originally died without smearing anything. So it makes no sense. I understand how they would say, well, then how did that happen? So I couldn't tell you. I wasn't there, but I don't believe that happened. I don't think Manson had the nerve.
Yeah. Any idea where Stephen Parent's car went?
No, that's an interesting. I wondered about that too, but no, the family probably just wanted to get rid of it, and I don't know how to trace VIN numbers. I think the DMV might do that, and maybe it still exists somewhere. I don't know, but they have to have the VIN number somewhere. I'm sure that's in one of the reports. So that'd be interesting, but I don't have access to that sort of research. So but that'd be interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know if you even know the answer to this or not, but I am curious. There's a mother load of these crime scene photos that actually hit the internet. I remember when they did. I actually bought them off of eBay. It was back in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken. And you would buy them, and they were they were like glossy photos of the crime scene and stuff. And they leaked out somehow. I'm sure that I don't know how that happened, but is there probably a lot more crime scene photos that are available on this case, or is what is out there is what exists on this case, if you know?
Oh, I do. There are stacks of photographs and stacks of evidence that are still in the district attorney's office downtown in Los Angeles. I mean, all that stuff is still there. The weapons and the clothes and everything is still in storage boxes downtown in LA. Now, there's a website that I highly recommend. You've probably seen it. It's called cielodrive.com. And the
Yeah.
gentleman who owns that website got all these pictures. I don't know how. I know the guy. He's a really nice guy. But he has all of those photographs, and he's constantly, not constantly, but quite often, posting evidence photographs, of things that were in the certain crime scene areas, and he posts reports and audio interviews and things like that. So it's an amazingly factual, fascinating evidence site. And every once in a while he'll post something. God, there he goes. I don't know. He must have his whole stack that he just gives out little by little. But yeah, it's fascinating. So yeah, there's a lot that we haven't seen. I have no doubt.
Yeah, I was actually also really impressed at your friend that he was as candid and open about having you come down to the medical examiner's office and so forth. And I remember in the 70s, we actually moved back up to Northern California, but we made a trip down to Southern California. And I remember you show a picture of that woman's hospital, and that's that right across the street from that. You know where I'm talking, where the medical examiner's office used to
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
So we stayed in a Holiday Inn that was right across the street from that, and I remember I was sitting there looking out the window, and I didn't know what in the heck I was looking at first, and I see all these hearses just one after the other and after the other, and every now and then you'd see like a foot, and my mom was like, "What are you looking at?" And I'm like, "They're bringing bodies over here," and it was like a constant flow of
Yeah,
bodies, and I
yeah.
just remember because Quincy was on TV, so I was like, "Hey, I was waiting to try to catch a glimpse of Quincy." Or Thomas Noguchi, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what an amazing experience to be able to go there, and that was pretty nice of him to go at lengths the way he did to
Yeah,
do it.
Noguchi is a fascinating man. In fact, they just this week premiered somewhere his documentary. I don't know where it's going to be released, widescreen or wide release, but there is a new documentary about and a biography about Noguchi that's due to be released like probably in March. So I'm excited about that. I got to meet him once, and it was a real treat to meet him because you're shaking his hand and you're thinking this is the guy who autopsied Marilyn Monroe and Bobby Kennedy and Natalie
Yeah,
Wood and Sharon Tate, and you know what I mean. It's like these
yeah,
hands have history in them,
yeah,
literally, I guess. But he was such a nice guy, and I did ask Craig Harvey about. I asked. He gave me all the autopsy reports one day. He used to before he retired, he would give me documents. It's all public record. It wasn't like he was doing it on the
right,
slide. But I
right,
remember we were going through it, and I wanted to know what Sharon Tate had in her stomach. I wanted to know if she had Mexican food in her stomach because they supposedly ate at the El Coyote. And Craig, just weirdly enough, happened to be Dr. Noguchi was in the building at the time, and he was able to take Sharon's autopsy report and said, "Dr. Noguchi, can you look at this? What did you mean when you wrote this?" And it was just like a surreal time, just a really amazing moment. But it
yeah,
was an honor to meet him. I really have a lot of respect for Noguchi.
yeah. And you've met a ton of people, a ton of stars, etc., just from living in Los Angeles and so forth. And is there any other case that just really grabs you like this case? Another case that you would want to do like a documentary on it, or something that it just needs to be really explored?
It's hard to, I don't know. It'd have to be something really odd. Like the Black Dahlia, it's like, I'm not interested in the Black Dahlia because it's been done. And
Mhm.
if you want to know anything about the Black Dahlia, go send, and you'll find everything you could possibly want to know in about a half a second. And I like finding new things. I enjoyed when I do, like, because I'm only doing YouTube anymore, and I will find, odd bits of, true crime that will be, you won't believe this. Here's the story about this kind of a thing. And I quite like doing stuff with the people that aren't well known. It's hard. It's hard to find something that hasn't been done. And over and over and over and over again. But the Tate LaBianca thing is an exception because it has been done. But I always find it interesting. That's my go-to story. I always go to that story. If somebody tells me, I am 60 or 50 years old, I go, well, you're 50 years old. That means you were 10 years old at this, when the
Yeah,
murders happened. And
yeah,
everything is it makes me think of that time. It's such a weird thing. So it strikes me emotionally, and that's why I'm interested in it. And I guess I haven't found another one that strikes me emotionally like that.
Do you have any artifacts from the Menendez case or from the OJ case?
No, I mean, I have OJ crime scene tape. I do have that. And but no, not really. No, no, not about that. I wrote Eric Menendez a note in prison when they were going to their second trial. I did write them, but I was honest about it because they were trying to raise money. And I said, well, I'll give you $50, but I want their autographs, Eric and Lyle's autographs. And I got this really curt letter back saying Eric and Lyle are not for sale. And that's better than any autograph to me.
Yeah.
So
No, that's great.
yeah, but yeah, so here and there I'll collect certain things, but I don't have anything from them. I'd love to go in that house. That'd be really interesting. That'd be a really
That would
interesting.
be it. Well, who lives there? I mean, do you know who lives there?
Not anymore. I don't. So whoever bought it, it's been closed up for probably a year now, and it's being completely renovated. There's a fence
Oh,
up in front of it, so a lot of people think it's
yeah.
because of that Ryan Murphy show, but no, it's just new owners and they're gutting the place. Amazingly, not tearing it down. It seems like every other house in Beverly Hills is being torn down. I'm
Yeah.
surprised that one isn't.
Now, did they film that documentary inside of that house? Because
The
they really,
Ryan
there was,
Murphy TV show? No,
yeah,
no.
no.
They found another house that looked a lot like it, but no,
Okay.
that was not filmed there. No.
And if I'm not mistaken, wasn't there some other famous residents that lived in that house previous to the Menendez?
Yeah, Nicole Brown Simpson had her baby shower in the Menendez house. How weird is that? Probably in the murder room. It's just because it was Kris Jenner, the Kardashian. There's like a trail there that has to do with the Kardashians and Nicole Simpson, who was part of that whole. And then Elton John lived there for a while.
That's right.
Um,
That's
I
right. I
know
remember that.
that. Was it? That's the only one I'll say for sure. I want to say a couple. I know that like the Eurythmics had dinner in that house and stuff like that, but because he was
Yeah.
a representative for our RCA records. But yeah, so there were several famous people that lived in that house.
Yeah. And you've even been in the house where Marvin Gaye was killed,
Yeah.
right? Did I? Yeah. You're at a party, just a random party, right? You're like,
Yeah, no, it was I don't know what it was, an architecture party or something like that. It was really weird. And a friend of mine, he goes, "You want to go to Marvin Gaye's house?" Are you kidding me?
yeah,
So,
right.
nobody had YouTube channels or anything like that. Then I had a crappy cell phone that took crappy pictures. But yeah, I ended up in the room where Marvin was killed, and I took video of that inside of the house and walking down the stairs the way
Yeah.
his father would have that day that he murdered him. So yeah, that was weird. Things like that happened a lot though. When people go, "Hey, here's a thing. You interested in this?" And
Yeah.
I got some great invites that way.
Yeah, there was a couple of houses that I actually kind of found when I was in Palm Springs, and one of them was Liberace's, which is cool. I mean, with the
Yeah.
Statue of Liberty in the yard, but Leonardo DiCaprio's house. So of course, me and my wife were just kind of sitting there for a minute. Have you seen him? Did you
No,
get to meet? No, you haven't. So I mean, did you get to meet him or any of the other like Brad Pitt or anybody that was in the movie?
no, they were around, but the only one I actually had an interaction with was Emil Hirsch, who played Jay Sebring. I saw
Okay.
Margot Robbie there, but I didn't know who that was. I just knew it was the girl playing Sharon Tate, and I said hello, but no. Otherwise, I was at the shoots. I saw Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio quite a bit, but I was never, that was as a spectator. That was me watching
Right.
what was going on. So no, I never got to meet them.
And the Charteau, I just want to mention the correct my pronunciation. I'm Minoki, but it's the Charte Marmot.
Chateau Marmont, yeah, Chateau
There you
Marmont,
go. Have you been in there? I mean, that's a pretty historic place too. With
yeah.
didn't somebody died in there too? I can't remember which it was
Well,
a
yeah, I
huge.
mean, the hotel's been around forever, and so many, they used to say at the studios because it's right on Sunset, but it's quite secluded in its way. It's sort of gothic-looking building, and the
Right.
studios is to tell people if you're going to get in trouble, if you're going to get up to no good, do it at the Marmont because they could cover it up there. It was an enclosed area, so people would have trysts there, and people lived there for years. Keanu Reeves lived there for like 5 years, so and Sharon and Roman lived there for several months until they moved on to Cielo Drive. So yeah, and Belushi, there are bungalows in the back, and
That's
Belushi
right.
died in bungalow number 3. And oddly enough, when I found out later on, when I did Anthony Bourdain's show, he stayed in that same area. He says to me, I stay in Belushi's bungalow. I go, are you kidding me? And he goes, yeah. I said, I want to come and see it. And he's like, I can't. I don't have any time. But I've been in there since then a couple of times. So
Really?
yeah.
Wow. And it hasn't changed much, probably.
And then, well, I mean, the shell's still there, but new furniture. It
Yeah.
happened in
Yeah.
1983, so they've
Yeah.
renovated several times since then. But the walls and
Right.
the toilets and everything are still in the
Huh.
same place.
All right. Well, I want to talk a little bit briefly so we don't miss this. Where you have a podcast, it's the Dearly Departed podcast, massively popular. You got just a motherload of ladies and gentlemen. If you're wanting to check out a podcast, he's got stuff on there from how do you go to that little cave from Spawn Ranch, and he'll show you the way to where you're not breaking the law and the easy way to get there. From that to talking about Bewitched and the Munsters to I'm literally I was just like, wow, this is great. I'm learning all kinds of stuff about so many different things. How many episodes do you have of that?
Geez, I could not tell you. I don't know. I've never figured that out. But it's interesting because some of our like we've done podcasts about Sunset Boulevard that last longer than the film, but it has to do, with all the
Yeah.
people involved in their stories and what happened to them and the locations. And, we just do deep dives into that. And what I'm most active now on is YouTube. And that's where we did the walk to the cave. I took a camera and we parked and I showed where people could walk and go down to the cave where the Manson family took that famous photograph. And I did the Marvin Gaye, I put that up there where you see Marvin Gaye's house, the inside of the house, and that path his father would have walked. So I'd like to sort of reconstruct history, I guess. I want to walk
Yeah.
in their footprints. And
Yeah.
so just again, it's mostly the podcast is mostly things you didn't know about things you thought you knew everything about. And
Yeah.
and the YouTube stuff, I do into all that too, because like Anissa Jones was something I just finished, who was the little girl from Family Affair, who was the first little child star to overdose back in 1976, and sort of started the genre of teen actors that kind of went down the wrong path. And some of these locations, a lot of them are still there. So to me, it's finding information that a lot of people didn't know, and
All right.
and I love that.
What's the future? I mean, are you wanting to reopen this museum and do that in Palm Springs, or is that what you're kind of shooting towards? Or
Well, I hope so. I mean, we've been here, gosh, almost 5 years it was actually 5 years ago last week that we shut down our tour company and, came out here with the hopes of doing that out here because there's a Hollywood history out here. We looked at Nashville, we looked at Dallas, we looked at New Orleans, we looked in a lot of different locations. And we just decided on Palm Springs because it's close to LA, but it has a Hollywood connection. So if we took Jane Mansfield's car to Nashville, who's going to know in Nashville who Jane Mansfield was? But in Palm
yeah,
Springs, she has a history. So that's why we chose it. So hopefully, it'll open up here at some point. And we just need to find that mystery lottery ticket that everyone's looking for.
yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And do you do public speaking, like keynote speaking or anything like that? Is that something in your wheelhouse? I just want to make sure that people are aware of it if you do it. And you do that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do it. I thought about, trying to get something like that together to go to like retirement homes because they're the people that are interested in these sorts of things and they're of that age, 55 and plus communities. I've done
Yeah.
that. Whittier Library hires me every year to do a discussion, and I bring along my trunk full of weird little artifacts and I really enjoy doing those things. I think they're a lot of fun and do the Q&As with people, and I get challenged, and it's fun. I really do enjoy doing that
Yeah.
stuff. And
I mean,
so I do.
you've got a ton of artifacts. I mean, even including Charlie Chaplin's suitcase, right?
Yeah. I'm
So,
so God, a piece of the floor that Bobby Kennedy. I'm looking at Rock Hudson's bedpost. I have Zsa Gabor's father's walking cane here. I mean, there's just everywhere around here is just stuff. So
yeah,
I need
I mean,
I need to get this out of my house.
and that's what's cool is that some of this stuff that people just send to you and say, "Hey, do you want this?" Like Karen Carpenter's sink
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And so you have unpackaging things on some of your podcasts too, which is absolutely fun. It's like Christmas, to see what
It
these
is.
items are going to
It
look
is.
like. And even if it's
It's
just a
funny. Yeah.
newspaper article, that's cool. It's still cool.
It's history. They have, and you're right. People do. There was, before I left LA, this guy called me and he says, he sent me an email and he says, I have something you might be interested in. I have the sink that Lucille Ball, I had it in Lucille Ball's house where she used to dye her hair in. She had a hairdressing salon in her house on Roxbury Drive, with the little dip in it that you put your head in and the person would do your hair. And he said, do you want it? I'm like, yeah. So he knew somebody who did the renovations back when Lucy died and they gutted the house. And he took it because he says, like, I was going to make a bird bath out of it or something. And that never happened. So he said, if you want to come over and get it. And so I went and got it. And he goes, oh, you can have this too. And it's like Lucy's gas station credit card. I'm like, this is so cool.
That is cool.
I love that kind of stuff because it's normal everyday stuff. I mean, autographs.
Yeah.
Fine, that's cool. Costumes for movies, love it. But stuff that people used every day, it's to me that's the sort of magic spot.
Yep.
That's
why this is priceless to me. And it's really cool. I agree with you. That's great. So, and then the final thing I'll ask you about is, so basically, possibility of the museum. Have you ever thought about writing a book? I mean, just the knowledge you've got, my gosh, Scott, it's just amazing, really.
When I was still living in England, I co-wrote a book about the Rocky Horror Picture Show, because that was another one of my things when I was growing up. And when I lived there and I told you I couldn't leave or I couldn't work for 18 months, I started chasing down everyone that was involved in the movie, the actors and the people who worked in the production, and I interviewed them for this book. And, the book got published and that was wonderful. But it's going to sound, I do better in a month on YouTube than I have, working on that entire book for a year, which sounds like I'm making a ton of money. I'm not, believe me, there wasn't a lot of money either way, but it's just a lot of work. And I figure, well, my videos are my work. I'm not very, I prefer the fun. I prefer talking. I prefer narration, and I prefer showing people things. That's why I love doing sightseeing in Hollywood. Actually showing stuff was great. That was the magic of it. And being able to pull up in front of Janis Joplin's hotel room, and actually from the street being able to see inside the room where Janis Joplin died in 1970. And then while we were there, I would play Janis singing, and it's like there's the wham pow moment. That was magic, because you can't, this is history, and you're listening to it and now you're seeing it. And that's what I do on YouTube now. I love that. So that is my job, and I quite enjoy doing it. I really do. I love to have the museum. Absolutely love to have the museum.
Yeah. So if you want to schedule a tour with Scott, you can reach out to him. He's on Instagram, and you could also reach him on YouTube, I'm sure. And
Dearly Departed Tours. You'll find a Facebook group. There's also Dearly Departed Tours on Facebook, my own page on Facebook, but there's also a group on Facebook called Death Hags, and there's about 26,000 members in there, and it's just bantering back and forth about, well, obviously the hot topic today is Gene Hackman, but about all the true crime documentaries and celebrities and where they're buried. And it's an interesting group of people, and that's on Facebook too. I'm on Instagram, of course, and Twitter and all of that business too. But you can reach me on my dearlydepartedtours.com website. You can reach out to me through there. I also sell artifacts. I sell pieces of glass from the Jane Mansfield car, from the windshield. I have a piece of the house from Cielo Drive, the fireplace where the murders occurred. And I went up there when the house was being demolished, and I got them myself. Well, there you are. The stone came from Cielo Drive. So this is real history. I will market them. I have to, because it's the way I pay my bills. And I'm not being disrespectful of it. Just giving people access to these sorts of things. I think that's kind of cool. And when they run out, they run out. I had at one point, I was selling pieces of John Denver's airplane, and I still have the original larger piece that I have on display, and I won't do it anymore because it's gone. So, people, it's not like I can produce the stuff. I have it, I'll share it. And it's real pieces of real things that really happened. A staircase from Lee Harvey Oswald that he was standing in front of, that famous photograph where he's got the rifle in his hands. I was there in Dallas, and I got a chunk of the staircase. So, it's cool to make these things available to people, and it's cool to actually be there to touch these things. It's a tactile thing. This is history.
Yeah. Hey, what's the most recent news on the Gene Hackman thing? That's horrible, by the way. I hate to hear it. I was thinking carbon monoxide, but I don't
Yeah,
know
that's been
what's.
ruled out.
Oh, it has.
The
Okay.
Yeah, he was found on the porch of the house. It sounds like it's like a shack. It's a really big house. I mean, it's not like he was living in the middle of the woods. It's a very nice, large house,
Yeah.
and he was found in the what they call the mud porch, and then she was found. His wife was found in the bathroom on the floor. They say that she may have hit her head. They found an open pill bottle there in the room, and Hackman's pacemaker stopped working on the 17th. So that would be, what is it, about 10 days before his body was discovered. So yeah, the plot thickens, but I don't think they're looking at it as suspicious deaths. I think they know the answer. You know what it's like. You visit crime scenes, you pretty much know what's happening right away, but you got to cross the T's and dot the I's.
Oh
You
yeah.
want to know all the
Yeah.
toxicology and everything before you come out with an absolute, cause of death. But I'm sure they know now, and it's just a matter of what happened. Did they do it themselves, or did she find him and decide to do it herself? Or, it's the scenario. But yeah, it is sad. He was, he wanted to be left alone though, and people left him alone.
Yeah. What type of tours do you do? I mean, you have to have specific types of tours. I'm sure you have a Manson tour that if you were to do one of those, and
Well,
what
when
else?
people hire me, I
Yeah.
come in for the day. So people have me for about 6 hours, and I, what do you want to see? What are you interested in? They'll say, well, I want to see Helter Skelter. I said, well, okay, Helter Skelter is easy. Do you want to go out to the cave? We can do that. And then I'll say, well, are you interested? On the way there is the cemetery where Marilyn is, and Betty Page and Rodney Dangerfield, and so we could stop over there. And then if they're interested in Salminio, we'll go back to the garage where Salminio was murdered. And so I'll pick their brains and try to figure out what it is exactly. Some people are really into 60s Los Angeles, and there's Laurel Canyon, and I'm all about that. So the Mamas and the Papas
Yeah.
and Mama Cass and the Jim Morrison, so
Oh
it's
yeah.
really, it's whatever people want to do, they can hire me, and I know my way around, and I know the stories. So it's one
Right.
other thing. When you remember, we didn't have GPS back then. If you wanted to see something like Cielo Drive, if somebody was visiting, didn't know it very well, you'd be like, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? And it's not very interesting to try to find your way there. I know my way there. I can talk while we're up there, and I can make it, so it's zipping in and out of these places, and being able to see it, making good use of time, and showing people some really cool stuff. So
Yeah.
it's basically, if they hire me, I'll show them whatever they want to see.
Yeah. I think that's, I mean, if you're into that stuff, I think that's great. Reach out to him. I'm probably going to reach out to him at some point I would love to see this. I think it'd be fascinating to see some of these areas. And so, does anybody still live? I'm going on a couple more questions, and I promise.
All right.
And then
All right.
Is there anybody that still lives on Cielo Drive that were from that period of time?
No, no. There were only two houses on that street that were close to Cielo Drive, and both of those houses are still there. But now there are three other streets and three other houses
That,
on that street. This is your
that actually,
intersection. That was Van Nuys
well,
Boulevard.
yeah, that was actually, yeah, that was Van Nuys and Benedict. That's just right south of Valley Vista. So Valley Vista
Okay.
is right up where that splits off, and then it goes to Beverly Glen. But yeah, that's where I grew up for a little bit. And so there's a guy that lives there in one of the houses that was not period correct, but I know who I'm talking about.
David
I,
Oman.
the,
Yeah.
yeah, he was on Ghost Hunters. Is that right? Was that what he was
Yes.
on? And you know
Yeah.
him.
David has David had, his house is about 21, 22 years, and he's about 50 yards from where the murders happened. Even the house where the murders happened is gone. I mean, that was torn down back in 1993. So, but David lives on Cielo Drive, and David's house is haunted, and people go, oh, poo poo, that's nonsense. But believe me, I've been in that house. I don't have to convince anybody, I've been there and I've seen it myself. So yeah, there's also, Benedict is a terrible place. I can name probably 30 famous terrible things that have happened to some famous people having to do with Benedict Canyon. And I don't even know if I can touch on the people that I don't know, because I don't know, but I know a lot. George Reeves, Superman, Susan Berman, who was the Durst murder victim. You've got Jay Sebring, who lived in Benedict. Is the same house that Paul Byrne, Gene Harlow's wife, killed himself in. All the way up Benedict Canyon from Sunset to Mulholland, there are probably even more than 30, probably 50 that I could name if I sat down and did it. So Benedict is a terrible place. And I know that there were like Indian issues there. There's a plaque that marks a massacre of the Native American people that have murdered on Benedict Canyon Boulevard. So I think that it coincides with all that stuff. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that house that Jay Sebring lived in, actually, it's really incredible looking, and it looks really spooky to me, honestly. What's that like inside? Is that I know that they've got the case that turns around. Is it
I've never been in. I've never been
really?
in. I'm friends
Really?
with the people who own it, and they've always been really nice to me if I say, "Can I come up?" And they'll go, "Sure,"
Yeah.
and they'll meet
Yeah.
me outside, and we're talking, and they're terrific people. You see that? I don't know if you could see that. Sorry about that. If you could see that lamp right there, there's a photograph of Sharon Tate right behind it, holding
Yeah.
on or standing next to that very lamp. They gave me that because Sharon used to date Jay Sebring, and stayed at that house several times. So, but the people I know who own it are very, very kind, and they've been very generous with their house and letting me show it to people, and used it for Tarantino. They used it for our
Yeah.
documentary too. But I've never been in it, no. And I can't imagine it looks that different because they bought it from Jay's family.
Yeah, it's really incredible. The thing looks massive, really, and the Doors lived next, or really close, and so forth. But that's just the history up there. It's just amazing. I love the Hollywood Hills. When I've returned a couple of times, it's been a long time since I've been to LA, but when I've returned, I love driving up through there. It's just gorgeous.
Yeah.
Hopefully none of that area really got damaged by the fires. I hope so.
No, it didn't, thankfully. Yeah, I mean, it came close. David was, they're getting nervous. They were on like they were two from, the levels of evacuation, and they were pretty
Yeah.
close, probably about a mile from where the fires actually touched. So, and it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like it's a far distance, but that thing was traveling fast, that fire. So it was hairy for a bit of time there. But no, I'm glad that Benedict, I'm glad they all survived. There's always the
Yeah.
threat of things like that happening in LA.
And the final person I'm going to ask you about is Steve Grogan. I mean, I've seen some videos where he does music. He's still out and about. Is that somebody that you've ever come across or tried to just talk to him?
No, I mean, Steve Rogan's was he got convicted for exposing himself in the grade school. Do you know what I mean? This is not a guy I want to be around.
Yeah.
Aside from being involved with Shorty Shea's murder, and that is, who was a ranch hand at the Spawn Ranch. So no, I have no desire
No.
to talk to these people. There's
Yeah.
nothing that I could possibly learn from that person. And I don't think anyway. Maybe that's me being cocky. But like I have a friend, his name is Michael Channels. And Michael Channels was good friends with Manson. And Michael Channels has a YouTube channel called Back Porch Tapes. And it's an amazing treasure trove document of loads of video on the news appearances from the 70s and 80s and documents and so many artifacts. And while Manson was alive, I knew of Michael, but I didn't want to talk to Michael because I know Michael has that like intense energy that Manson had. And after Manson died, we did a show called Dark Tourists, I think it was what it's called, on Netflix. And I got introduced to Michael, and we ended up hitting it off. He's a lot like me. He's not a Manson supporter. He's not a Manson fan, but he was friends with Manson. And I got to learn a lot about Manson through Michael. And he's not glorifying. He knows Manson was a terrible person, but he also became friends with Manson. And Michael's a compassionate man. So it's fascinating to get to know him and to see hear a side about Manson that I didn't know. That to me is interesting. When I learned that Manson listened to Donna Summer and Aretha Franklin music, I thought, oh, that is fascinating. And that just chipped away a lot of Manson mystique right there. I just learned a lot about Manson just by knowing that. So
Yeah.
that's been really interesting. But I wouldn't pursue that normally. But I do like Michael, and we do get along really, really well. And he's an historian as much as I am.
Yeah.
And he's fascinating. But in fact, when Manson was cremated, and they had a ceremony with some of his fans, and they were fans, sprinkled his ashes at this national park, and of course Zach Baggins bankrolled the whole thing, and because he paid Manson's grandson for the rights to film all of this stuff, and then they were out there and they're smearing his ashes into their faces. I mean, it's like
I saw it.
insane.
It was weird. It was weird.
It was
Yeah.
awful. And Michael was like, this is my friend. All I wanted to do was try to get a hold of Manson's remains and put him somewhere quiet where he wouldn't be bothered, because he knew, Manson didn't want to become a tourist attraction. And so Michael and I went out there and I videotaped the whole thing, an interview with Michael. And it was fascinating to get to know more about that. Now that's, see, I'm kind of contradicting what I said earlier about not wanting to know more about those people. I wouldn't have pursued it. But Michael is a really interesting guy. Now that I know him, I know his heart's in the right place. But if you were just to meet him, you'd be like, whoa, and that's sort of the way I was for a long time. So don't judge a book by its cover, I guess.
Yeah, I'd seen a guy that, I mean, he looks just like Manson, and I think he's probably, to tell you the truth, he looks like he could be his son. And I know that's speculate. He hadn't done the DNA or whatever. You know who I'm talking about, right? I mean,
do.
He looks like a spitting image of Manson.
Oh, you're thinking of you're thinking of that guy that just died, and I forget his name. He said he was Manson's son. I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but yeah, he just died like less than a year ago. And he claimed he was Manson was his father, but they did do a DNA test and he wasn't. But you're right, spitting image.
Okay.
But
wow,
it's a really complicated story too, because the guy who claims to be Manson's blood relative maybe isn't, and they're comparing all the DNA to this kid who claims to be the grandson, who might Matthew Roberts was his name. And Matthew was an interesting guy, and I met him a couple of times, and he's friendly enough. But he was also in a rock band, and he dyed his hair black, and he's walking around wearing black, and he's very Manson was my dad. I'm so cool, and I find that really exhausting. But yeah,
and then the other people I was kind of curious about, and I promise we'll close this up. Okay. But like William Garretson, Winifred Chapman, and like Danny DiCarlo, those kind of people. What happened to these people? I mean, they just kind of, you never really would see them on.
Yeah. Well, Garretson did a couple of interviews. William Garretson was the caretaker, the only one who was on the property that lived that night when Sharon Tate and the others were murdered. And he'd only been in LA for a couple of months. He was from Ohio. And he was hired by Rudolph Altobelli, who owned the house, and to stay in the guest house while Altobelli was in Europe, and Sharon and Roman were renting the main house. So Garretson kind of lost his mind, understandably so. I mean, he didn't know the murders happened only feet from the door of the guest house. And the police knocked down his door and are dragging him and shoving him Abigail Folger's sliced up face, saying, you did this. And, who is this on the lawn? And he's saying, I think it's Roman Polanski, the Polanski man. And it's Wojciech Frykowski, who'd been stabbed 51 times. And people are spitting on him, and he's arrested, and he's, calling him a murderer. So that kid, 18 years old, of course he lost his mind. He went back to Ohio, and I think it was a substance abuse issues. He died probably 5-6 years ago in Ohio. Winifred Chapman, the housekeeper who discovered the bodies, she retired. She was not La Jolla, but she was way off the radar. She wanted nothing to do with anything. She was never interviewed, and she died a couple of years ago too. And I forget, you mentioned one other person. Oh, Danny DiCarlo. Yeah, he's around. I don't know where he is. No one's ever heard anything from him. So
because in the movie he seems like a pretty cool guy, and he helped out a lot. So listen, Scott, I cannot thank you enough, buddy. You made my night. You've really, this is a record. We've never went past 55 minutes on this show. You are the exception that we were going to do this for. And literally, man, I could listen to you for hours and hours and hours. Ladies and gentlemen, check out his podcast. I promise you're going to love it. And if you're in the LA area and you want to take a personal tour with him, then reach out to him and work something out. And I'm sure that you would, it'll be something that you won't forget. I have no doubt about it. Scott, seriously, man, you're like a buddy to me. You're a friend from, as far as I'm concerned. When I'm teaching out in October, hopefully you're going to be in town. And once I get a definitive date, I'll let you know and I'll sneak you in. And you're going to be my personal guest.
I love that. Maybe we can grab a meal. I would love that. That sounds like so much fun. Thank you for having me on, Jake. Thank you.
Oh, done. We'll definitely get something to eat and we'll share stories, etc. And if you come to Tulsa, I'll give you a personal tour around. So love it. Thank you all very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think we've taken Scott's time enough at this point. We are the #1 true crime show on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. I just learned that. #1. There's only 2 shows that are true crime. No, I'm just kidding. There's more than that, but we're #1. We're #1, and we are not going to be able to do that without you, the viewers. And you guys are just really loyal fans, and we appreciate it. Like and subscribe. Go to my Detective Jason White YouTube page. Go to the Detective Jason White YouTube page. Also, like and subscribe, please. I don't make anything, but maybe one day I would like to make a few cents somewhere down the line, and to try to join us there. Also, remember to go to the playlist on my YouTube page, and you can catch the 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter. You can catch that other video, the Wonderland murder crime scene video, and a couple of other things on there that are really cool. And thank you, Scott. Really.
Thanks, Jason. Thank you so much for having me on. I sure appreciate it.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we should go ahead and take off. Next week, we're going to have a guest that's going to talk about the Flock camera systems. She's coming to us from Boise, Idaho. Tune in next Friday, 7 p.m. Central, and we'll talk Flock cameras. Thanks again. Amanda, take us out.